What would you do if you truly believed you could build a better world? Not reform the existing one through politics or protest or gradual change. Start over. Completely. From a blank piece of land. New rules for how people share resources. New rules for relationships. New rules for how decisions are made, how children are raised, how work is compensated. A clean slate, built by people who decided the society they came from wasn't working well enough. Throughout history, thousands of people have answered that question by leaving everything behind, selling their houses, leaving their families, crossing oceans or continents to join someone who said, "I know how to do this better." Some of these communities lasted decades. Some lasted weeks. Some ended in legal dissolution and awkward division of assets. Some ended in mass death. Today we're visiting 6 of them, across 2 centuries, for continents, and the full spectrum of ways that the dream of human perfectibility runs into the reality of actual human beings. Because the utopias didn't fail because the people in them were stupid. They failed for reasons that are specific, identifiable, and worth understanding. In 1825, a Welsh industrialist named Robert Owen purchased a town in Indiana and announced he was going to prove something. Owen was already famous. He ran cotton mills in Scotland and had implemented reforms that were radical for their time: shorter working hours, better conditions, schools for workers' children. He believed that the environment shaped human character. Give people a just environment, and they would become just people. New Harmony, Indiana, was his test case. He paid $125,000 for the existing town, renamed it, and issued an open invitation. No screening, no membership requirements. Everyone was welcome to come and build the new moral world. 800 people showed up. Owen gave stirring speeches. He spent most of his time traveling between New Harmony and Washington, D.C. and London, promoting his ideas. Back in New Harmony, 800 people with different expectations about what the new moral world meant were trying to govern themselves. There were fights about work distribution, about who was actually pulling their weight, about what the children's education should involve, about whether Owen's rules, about relationships were binding. There were splinter groups, subcommunities, members who left and took resources with them. Within 2 years, New Harmony was effectively over. Owen lost approximately 4/5 of his fortune. He never stopped believing the idea was right. His conclusion was not that the experiment had failed. It was that the people had not yet been properly prepared for it. That conclusion, the idea is correct, the people just weren't ready, is one we'll see again. 30 years later, New York State, a community called Oneida, founded by John Humphrey Noyes, a theologian from Vermont who had concluded that conventional marriage was a form of selfishness, a man claiming exclusive ownership of a woman of a man, incompatible with genuine Christian communism. At Oneida, there was no marriage. There was what Noyes called complex marriage. Every member of the community was considered married to every other member. Sexual partnerships were regulated by a committee. Older members were paired, preferentially with younger ones, for reasons of spiritual development. Noyes later admitted he paired himself preferentially with young women. Despite these features, which create obvious discomfort from a modern perspective, the Oneida community ran for 31 years and was, by most external measures, extraordinarily functional. They made a wide range of products: animal traps, furniture, fruit preserves. Their members were educated, articulate, and productive. They practiced mutual criticism, regular sessions where every member received detailed community feedback on their behavior and attitude. Members who underwent mutual criticism reported finding it both excruciating and clarifying. The community collapsed not from external pressure, but from internal succession. When Noyes' son attempted to take over leadership, the community fractured. Members disagreed fundamentally about whether to continue complex marriage. In 1880, Oneida converted itself into a joint stock company. The company still exists. You may own some of their products. Oneida Limited makes silverware. It's sold in department stores worldwide. A community that abolished property became a corporation. A community that abolished marriage sells wedding registry gifts. In 1928, Henry Ford was facing a problem. The Ford Motor Company needed rubber for tires. The global rubber supply was controlled by British and Dutch colonial interests in Southeast Asia, and prices were rising. Ford decided the solution was to grow his own. He purchased 25,000 square kilometers of Amazon rainforest in Brazil, an area larger than Connecticut, and announced he was going to build an American industrial town in the middle of it. He called it Fordlandia. Ford did not visit. He sent managers from Michigan. The managers imported everything: the architecture, the food, the rules. American-style houses in the Amazon. American working hours. In a climate where outdoor work at midday was dangerous. A cafeteria serving American food, including whole wheat bread and brown rice, to Brazilian workers who found it unpalatable and strange. Alcohol was banned. So were tobacco and women in the sleeping quarters. Ford believed the Amazon could be made to work like Dearborn if you imposed the right discipline. The rubber trees failed first. Ford's agronomists, brought from Michigan, planted them in rows, like corn. In the Amazon, rubber trees grown in close proximity are immediately found by leaf blight fungus and destroyed. Indigenous cultivators had always known this. Nobody asked them. Then came the insects, the disease, the heat. In December 1930, Brazilian workers rioted, attacking the cafeteria and the managers over the American food and American rules. The riot was suppressed by the Brazilian army. The Ford Motor Company spent 17 years and $20 million on Fordlandia. They never produced a single commercially viable bale of rubber. In 1945, Ford sold the entire territory back to the Brazilian government for $250,000. The town is still there. About 2,000 people live in it now. The Ford Water Tower still stands. The Ford Hospital still stands. The American-style houses are still there, in the middle of the Amazon. The rubber trees never came back. This one demands care. Because this isn't really a story about utopia. It's a story about what utopia becomes when the person controlling it decides no one is allowed to leave. The People's Temple was founded by Jim Jones in Indiana in the 1950s. At its peak in the 1970s, it had thousands of members in California. It was progressive, racially integrated, socially active. Jones genuinely helped people, housing the homeless, supporting addicts, organizing community care. But Jones was also erratic, addicted to prescription drugs, and increasingly paranoid about external threats. In 1974, the People's Temple established an agricultural commune in the remote Guyanese jungle, Jonestown. Jones framed it as a socialist paradise, an escape from American racism and capitalism. In its early years, Jonestown produced its own food, ran its own school and medical clinic. Members were genuinely committed, but access to the outside world was controlled. Letters were screened. Visitors were monitored. Jones held white nights, rehearsals for collective suicide, that members were told were tests of loyalty. By 1978, the reality of life in Jonestown was becoming difficult to conceal. A U.S. congressman named Leo Ryan flew to Guyana to investigate. He arrived. He spoke to members. Some members asked to leave with him. At the airstrip, as Ryan's delegation prepared to depart, People's Temple gunmen arrived and opened fire. Ryan and 4 others were killed. That evening, Jones ordered the community to drink poison. 918 people died on November 18, 1978. A third of them were children. It remains the deadliest single non-natural loss of American civilian life. Before September 11, 2001, Jonestown is not a story about the failure of idealism. It is a story about what happens when idealism becomes captured, when the leader's need for control grows to fill the entire space of the dream. Not all the utopias collapsed. In 1968, a French woman known as the Mother, Mira Alfassa, a disciple of the Indian philosopher Sri Aurobindo, inaugurated an international community on the southeastern coast of India, near Pondicherry. She called it Oroville, the City of Dawn. Its charter stated it belonged to nobody in particular. It was to be a living embodiment of human unity, a place where people of all nationalities could live together, without nationality matching. Representatives from 124 nations participated in the founding ceremony, each contributing a handful of soil from their home country to an urn at the community center. Today, Oroville is still running. It has approximately 3,000 permanent residents from 60 nations. It has its own currency, its own schools, its own industries. It has reforested a previously barren landscape, planting several million trees. It also has significant ongoing tensions with the Indian government, which passed legislation in 2022 fundamentally changing the governance structure, effectively bringing Oroville under greater state control. The existing residents protested. Bulldozers entered the community. Trees were felled. The utopia that survived for 50 years is now in conflict with the nation-state that surrounds it. Oroville teaches a different lesson from the others, not about how utopias collapse, but about how, even when they survive, they eventually come into conflict with the world that never agreed to the dream. In 1981, followers of the Indian mystic Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho, purchased a 64,000-acre ranch in the remote high desert of Wasco County, Oregon. They incorporated their own city, Rajneeshpuram. Within 4 years, it had 7,000 residents, its own airport, its own fire department, its own police force, its own public transport system. It was, by some definitions, the most successful intentional community in American history, in terms of sheer scale and operational complexity. It was also planning a political takeover of Wasco County. The commune's leadership, under a woman named Ma Anand Sheila, had determined that if they could elect enough Rajneeshi candidates to local government positions, they could control the county and secure the community's legal standing permanently. When it became clear they couldn't win the local election through legitimate votes, they attempted to suppress opposition turnout by poisoning the salad bars at 10 local restaurants with salmonella bacteria. 751 people fell ill. It was the first and remains the largest bioterrorism attack in United States history. The plot was discovered. Sheila fled to Germany. The Bhagwan himself negotiated a plea deal and was deported. Rajneeshpuram was dissolved in 1985. The ranch is now a Christian youth camp called Young Life. The Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country brought this story to global attention in 2018. What the documentary showed, and what struck millions of viewers, was not how obviously evil the people involved were. It was how normal and reasonable and committed they appeared. How easy it was to understand the path from idealism to catastrophe. 6 communities, 2 centuries, 4 continents, and the same mechanisms appearing in different combinations every time. The first, charismatic leadership that becomes authoritarian. Owen was the center of new harmony and also its most frequent absence. Noyes' complex marriage was, by his own acknowledgement, weighted in his favor. Ford's rules were imposed from a distance by a man who never lived there. Jones controlled all information and all exits. Rajneesh's leadership structure allowed Sheila to operate without accountability. When the leader is also the doctrine, the community has no stable ground that exists independently of one person's judgment. The second, the gap between the intended members and the actual ones. Owen invited anyone. He got 800 people with 800 different interpretations of the new moral world. Every intentional community that succeeded long-term, Oneida, Oroville, had a membership process that created shared expectations. The third, external pressure that the community has no framework for absorbing. Fordlandia's failure was partly internal, but the Amazon itself, the climate, the biology, the local knowledge that was never sought, was the external force. Jonestown's external pressure was a congressional investigation. Rajneeshpuram's was a county election. When a community cannot engage with the world outside it, it eventually becomes defined by that inability. In 2024, there were estimated to be approximately 10,000 intentional communities operating worldwide. Eco-villages, co-housing projects, charter city experiments, communes on the scale of Jonestown, communes on the scale of two families sharing a field. The impulse to start over, to take the belief that things could be organized better, and actually organize them better from scratch in a physical place, has not diminished. What the history suggests is not that the impulse is wrong. What the history suggests is that the dream is always easier to design than the membership process, easier to articulate than to govern, easier to start than to sustain when the charismatic founder dies, or the funding runs out, or the world outside the gates refuses to leave you alone. The gap between the map of the perfect society and the territory of actual people is where every utopia eventually finds itself. That gap is not a reason to stop trying. It's the problem that requires solving.